All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Sustainable in the City. We'll let folks trickle in for the first minute, as always. Jen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. A little cold. Air conditioning is working really well in the office today. So there's that. How about you, Christina?
I'm doing well. I just have the fan on, so just pushing humid air just like onto me, which always feels good.
Nice.
Which is
The
always
humidity.
fun. Yes.
We are
yes.
starting to get into those really hot days. Yesterday,
Yes.
we did a tour at the transfer station. So for those of you that are not familiar with transfer stations, it's where all your trash goes before it goes to the landfill. It was very hot. It was trash. It was a good time, though.
Humid trash. That's
Hot,
what we
humid
like
trash.
on Sustainable in the City. That's what we want to talk about every day. Wonderful. Well, it looks like most of the folks who are going to be joining us are already here. We'll let a couple of more folks join us, but we have a packed episode for y'all today. So we're going to get started. So welcome to the show and today's episode, Can Tennessee Green Its Grid? We are so excited to have TVA's Vice President, Environment and Chief Sustainability Officer, Rebecca Tolene, and NES's Customer Relations Manager, Paula Geruntino, with us today. Welcome, ladies, and we are excited to hear from you.
And as a reminder, Sustainable in the City is a partnership between Zero Waste Nashville, so that's me, and Urban Green Lab, that's Christina, where we discuss all things sustainability in Nashville. And of course, as a city, we have some very lofty goals around sustainability. And that's something that both Zero Waste Nashville and Urban Green Lab, we work to support. That includes things like waste reduction, my favorite topic of choice, environmental justice, green space, and emission reduction. So these are all goals that have been laid out in the Mayor's Sustainability Advisory Committee's recommendation for climate action. So you can check that out online. And we've also got Rachel Musetti in the chat. She's going to plop that in there for us, a link to that. And also today's discussion. For today's discussion, we are going to focus mostly on the city's aim to have an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and the city's goal to go 100% renewable energy for all government operations. But in order to do that, we need to have partners at the utility level that are making decisions with those goals in mind. So that's why we're super excited today to have NES and TVA here to discuss some of their pieces of this very complicated puzzle.
Yes, complicated indeed. And so last month, if some of y'all were here, and I know some of y'all were, we were talking about communicating effectively and respectfully about sustainability. And so that's what we're really hoping to do today, is have this really nuanced conversation, use those skills today, and start talking about sustainability and what is happening in our state and in our community, which TVA and NES, of course, have a large role to play in that. So we know this is a complicated conversation when you start talking about energy. There's lots of parts, lots of moving parts at the state and county level, but we understand that we all have to kind of work together and learn from the past, but to really keep moving forward towards a cleaner and more just future. So we really hope that today is a fruitful conversation for everyone involved, and we really are excited to dive in.
But before we do that, we do need to go over some logistics, especially because today, if you have joined us in the past, there's been some conversation around making sure that resources don't get lost in the chat and trying to find ways to better prioritize questions. And so we are going to be utilizing the Q&A feature of Zoom. This will be very exciting, but a little bit different from how we've done it. But hopefully this will meet kind of some of those needs that folks were asking for in the past. And so, as always, the chat is there. Make sure it's set to everyone so you can be sharing your conversation with everyone. Keep those conversations there. Continue to share those resources. Of course, we always pull that for the follow-up email after today's episode. But then also today, the new piece is that Q&A feature. So this is going to help us with that prioritization of questions, as well as just keeping them straight, keeping them separate. You can see both of them. So you'll notice at the bottom of your Zoom controls, or maybe at the top of your Zoom controls, there's a little Q&A button. It's got two little talking bubbles. So you'll see that icon on your screen. And then when you open that up, you're going to see the Q&A box. You're going to be able to see every single question as it comes in, see how we're going to answer that question, and as well as put in all of your wonderful questions that we're going to have posed to our guests at the end of today's episode, as we always do. And again, just a reminder, Rachel's going to be in the chat today moderating. She's here on the Zero Waste team, and it's been wonderful to help us today. So if you see her pop up, she's with us and she's helping y'all out in the chat. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can officially get started and get this conversation going. So first, we are going to hear from Paula Geruntino. Again, she's a customer relations manager for NES, and she is going to be sharing about their Power of Change program. So we're excited to hear from her, and I'll turn it over to her to share her screen.
Hello, all. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here to talk about Power of Change. It's gone way better than I expected it to be perfectly honest about it, but at any rate, we'll get there in a second. Like she said, I'm Paula Geruntino, and I've been customer relations manager for NES for 10 years. I've been with NES for 29. So long time NES employee, live just outside the city. So can't really say much about that, but I'm here today to talk about Power of Change. So in December of 2020, the Metro Council unanimously passed a resolution asking NES to create an opt-out bill roundup program using the funds collected from that to fund energy efficiency improvements. Mayor Cooper signed the resolution, and so later that month, our board approved a recommendation to implement such a program. They asked specifically for an opt-out program because they have seen that historically those are usually much more successful than opt-in programs. Currently, 86% of our customers are still opted in, which is tremendous. Whereas most opt-in programs, you're doing well if you get more than 10%. So roundup programs are not uncommon. Many utilities around the country have opt-out programs as a way to support low-income families with energy assistance. NES has a program to help customers with energy assistance. It's called Project Help. So this is different. We use our funds to go towards energy efficiency improvements as the council asked us to do. The most that any customer is going to pay in a year is $11.88. And the average, of course, is going to be around $6. Every penny that we collect goes directly towards energy efficiency improvements for people in our community. Home Uplift is our program that is a joint initiative between NES and TVA. It's a way to support families that don't necessarily have the income that is needed to make the energy efficiency improvements that they need to make their homes more comfortable and to make them more energy efficient and lower their costs. The good thing is that these upgrades that we make through Home Uplift are at no cost to the homeowner. They are not out one penny for the improvements that are made. As you can imagine, in the Nashville area has a lot of older homes that need these energy efficiency improvements, and people that live there, if they're on a limited income or a fixed income, they may not be able to afford them, which means month after month, year after year, their bills continue to increase. It's wasted electricity. Home Uplift helps with that. There is a network of contractors that installs energy efficiency appliances, heat pumps, sometimes doors and windows. They do air sealing, attic insulation, duct system improvements, low flow shower heads, all kinds of things like that to help improve the indoor air quality of the home as well as lower the energy burden for those customers. And what we've found in studies with on other weatherization studies is that it can actually reduce sickness, reduce therefore medical bills, and the trajectory of the home is improved from therefore just from weatherization. And that's the reason why I'm such a strong believer in it. It's a fantastic program, and Power of Change enables us to reach a lot more people with the funds that we collect from just a few cents each month from each customer. But across 400,000 people, that turns out to be a lot of money, right? It's an average of $140,000 a month that goes into the Power of Change, that comes from the Power of Change directly into the Home Uplift program. People don't have to participate. They are automatically opted in, but it's easy to opt out. You can log into your account on nespower.com and switch the toggle to off. They can also opt out by using our automated system. When you call our IVR at 736-6900, there is a prompt for Power of Change information, and they can opt out that way as well. And of course, we're always on the phones to help them from 6 a.m. until midnight too, if they need further assistance with that. But most of the time, when we tell people what the funds are being used for, even people that are detractors of the program being opt out, they decide to stay in because they realize the good that it can do to help customers stay in their homes and more comfortably and lower their energy bills. And that overall reduces their need for emergency assistance, right? It's an estimated 4,888 kilowatt hours are saved by each of these homes in a year's time. And over 600 homes thus far have been uplifted through the program. And you can find out if you are eligible for that by going to our website on nespower.com and go to the Energy Assistance page under Programs and Services and click the link for the application. That's it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Paula. We really appreciate you coming and kind of starting us off with this conversation about what NES is doing to help those in our community kind of lower their energy bills and be more efficient. So really, really wonderful. We usually don't ask the questions right away, but I just wanted to ask this one specific question. It was from Liz. Do you mind just explaining real quick the difference between opt-in and opt-out programs? And then I guess I have a follow-up question as well. If folks have already opted out, can they opt back in if they're seeing this now and thinking, oh, I shouldn't have opted out?
Sure. Yes. The difference between an opt-in program is that the customer has to take the initiative to contact their utility to say, I want to be a part of that program. An opt-out program is the opposite. If you don't want to participate, then you can contact us to opt out, because this was, and we actually tried to do this several years ago. The funds were not going to be used for energy efficiency programs, and it got killed before it got passed, before we ever even implemented it, because there was a public outcry for it. But with 86% of our customers still opted in, I think that says a lot for the value that the customers see that this does in our community. We've not had too much hate mail at all for this. And if you are opted out and you want to opt back in, those same options that you can take to log into your account, switch the toggle back to opted in, or the menu option in the IVR for Power of Change under the billing and payment menu can opt you back into the program. And we would love for you to do that.
Yes, we would too. Perfect, Paula. Thank you. And all the rest of the questions that are aimed at Paula in the Q&A, we will bring those back at the end like we usually do. That was kind of a simple one that I wanted to grab right now. So thanks so much, Paula.
All right, and next we are going to jump to Rebecca Tolene. So again, she's the Chief Sustainability Officer for TVA, and she's going to talk us through TVA's sustainability plan and what they are doing around sustainability in Middle Tennessee. So Rebecca, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So Jen, Christina, Paula, it is really great to join you guys today. And it's awesome to be part of a live stream with a community that is focused on sustainability in Nashville. So just thank you guys for the invitation. Awesome to be here. And Paula, hats off to our partners at NES for the Power of Change program. Those pennies can really add up, and we see that impact that we're having in energy efficiency. So awesome. I'll just encourage everybody to opt in or not opt out. So really great program there. Before I jump in today, I'll just a second on me, who you're talking with today. So I do serve as the Vice President of Environment and the Chief Sustainability Officer for TVA. My family's been in Tennessee since about the mid 1800s. We have a family farm south of Nashville, about an hour. It's a small farm. The farmhouse is tiny and it leans slightly to the right, but it is home. And so my journey with TVA started about 20 years ago. I was a young, hungry law student who wanted to really make a difference and be in public service. And I thought I would come back to Nashville or back home. And TVA came on on-campus interviews. And I ended up choosing to work with TVA. One reason is, I need to figure out how to, there we go. One reason is this mission that you see in front of you that really resonated with me. And it's one that has helped my family as we've lived in the region over time. So TVA is a public power institution, which means really practically means we're not trying to make quarterly stockholder dividends. We're really reinvesting back into the community we serve. We have a mission of improving life for the people of the region. That really appeals to me. And many of you may know, TVA was started in 1933 as part of the New Deal, really at its beginning focusing on flooding and navigation, reforestation and erosion, job training, and then providing energy, particularly to rural areas that weren't being served. And today it's been about almost 90 years and our kind of day-to-day operations have changed, but that core mission is still there. So we do our mission, as you see lined up here, providing affordable, reliable power, stewarding the valley's natural resources and protecting the environment, and serving as a partner for economic growth as well. So today, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the clean energy transition. So I'll start with this slide and a couple numbers to note here. TVA, its summer net capacity is around 38,000 megawatts, you see there. And a lot of work going into the clean energy transition. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and some of the risks and some of the wins we've had in this area and some of the challenges, right? There's lots of questions about, are you doing enough fast enough? And so we can talk about that as well. But before I keep going, I think I went too far. Just a few more tidbits about TVA. I didn't know this audience, how many of you guys were real familiar with TVA or not? So we do cover parts of 7 states. We have about 10,000 employees. Almost 20% of those are veterans, but we partner with 153 local power companies like NES, and together we serve 10 million end users. I'm going to talk about our carbon goals in 2030 and 2035 and our aspiration to be net zero today, but I'll also mention we manage about 290,000 acres of public land. And so this has been an area in TVA I've worked quite a bit with. We protect archaeological sites. A few weeks ago, I just came out of a tribal consultation. There's about 20 federally recognized tribes that once lived in the valley that still have a lot of care and concern about resources, archaeological resources in the valley. So we work closely with them. We work on threatened and endangered species habitat, but we also do a lot of work in recreation, mountain biking, camping, kayaking, boating, those sorts of things. And so those public lands along the Tennessee River system and its tributaries are a big piece of some of our, what we call internally, our stewardship work. And then specific to NES, there you'll see our economic development work. We've been partnering with NES in the last 5 years, 37,000 jobs committed and over $2 billion in investment. I don't need to tell any of you guys that Nashville seems to be growing at a breakneck pace, but continuing to work to make sure we're bringing good jobs into the Valley, including in Nashville. So I wanted to start today with a focus on our recently released sustainability report. So we just released this last month, and you can see the report focus areas there. So you see the environment, social governance, our economic impact as we make that clean energy transition. And the report itself has a lot of different sections. You can kind of see those laid out here, but we do use the Global Reporting Initiative framework. Those of you who are in that sustainability reporting area, that may sound familiar. We also line up our aspirations and our efforts to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so that helps you compare our data in all sorts of areas like air emissions, waste, social impact to a lot of different companies. So that data is all found in the report. I know we'll send a link to everybody who wants to dive in on that, and happy to answer any questions about the report and the work we're doing. The report lines out a number of different areas. Most companies kind of identify what they think of as the key priority areas or the material sustainability areas. You hear it talked about a couple of different ways. I'll give you an example. For some companies, human rights is like they're one of their top sustainability areas, particularly if they're sourcing materials abroad, right? And so you'll see that here. For TVA, these are the types of sustainability priorities that we have and that we're focused on. We've set some goals around those sorts of things. And today I'm going to talk about a couple, mostly around climate and our clean energy transition, but I also have just a couple slides on biodiversity, because I'm very excited about some of the work we're doing there and thought it might be of interest to some of the listeners today. So let's jump in on clean energy. This is a pretty simple slide, and for those of you who are familiar with the utility industry, I apologize, but I wanted to make sure we talked about this. So TVA is typically thought of on the wholesale side. So you see some of those generation resources on the left, the solar, the battery, nuclear, hydro generation, coal and gas, right? And then on the right side of the screen, you see where local power companies like NES doing the distribution system. They're also, through our flexibility program, doing some generation at their level as well. And so you can kind of see that split. A lot of the times members of the public I deal with aren't as familiar with TVA because they're used to dealing with their local power company, right? And so we're kind of at that wholesale level, providing power and other resources as well. So where is TVA's energy portfolio? So as I mentioned, we serve 153 local power companies. We also have some large direct served industrial customers, and we serve some military installations. But you can see a pretty big change in the portfolio here. So in 2005, a lot of folks use the 2005 baseline worldwide because of just some agreement in like the Paris Agreement and things like that. So 2005 is a pretty common baseline. So you'll see here, we generate a majority of our electricity from coal in 2005, but when you look ahead to 2021, you see that carbon-free generation jumping from 36 to 56%. That's a lot of increases in nuclear, gas, wind, and solar, and our hydro facilities as well. We are working to phase out coal. You'll see it's at around 16% in 21. Our goal is to phase out all coal by 2035. And so we're working toward that as well. So our carbon performance for 2021, you'll see some numbers on this slide. So 638 pounds per megawatt hour. So for every megawatt hour, the system in its entirety averaged about 638 pounds. So mass emissions, that's just your total tons, that's about 57% less than 2005. We're working toward a 70%. We have a plan to implement to get us to 70% by 2030 and 80% by 2035. So you'll see the point here about reliability. Reliability is still very key. I'll talk about that in a minute as well, but we continue to work hard to make sure we're delivering reliably to those local power customers, and they are working on that as they deliver to you. But you'll see at the bottom of the page, we are a leader in carbon reduction. You'll see the national average there and the regional average there as well. So we continue to try to be in front of folks. I will just be honest with this group. We do have plans and goals to 70 and 80%. Once you get past that, it is our investment in a lot of new technologies and research and development that's going to help carry us even further. And so we're doing a lot of partnerships with universities, DOE, organizations like EPRI, other folks like that to develop that longer term technology to really push that carbon down, because at the same time we're trying to decarbonize the existing generation fleet. One of the real answers to decarbonizing the economy is electrification, right? And so we're going to see that increase come into the system as well. So how do we have those carbon-free technologies to make sure we can maintain that reliability? So in 2020, the board established our strategic intent to decarbonize our electricity, and they set forth these guiding principles. So I'll just mention a handful of these. So obviously not sacrificing reliability and low cost principles. So two things there. One, from time to time, people like Paula let me come and sit in the customer window at a local power company. And nothing will remind you about the importance of affordability than seeing folks struggling in this space. And so we obviously keep that at forefront of mind. Also reliability. I think that is, I spend a lot of time with environmental groups and others, and I think we're agreeing on the goal about the need to urgently reduce carbon. I think it is questions about how fast and what tools to use. And one of the big pieces in that conversation is reliability. And this is for a second, Rebecca here saying this, but I worry that what happens if reliability does not stay strong in the beginning of this transition. You've seen some of that media about other areas of the country that are having some reliability issues, and what would that mean for our efforts here? And so watching that and making sure those two areas are key. Also using best available science and research. So we have a whole R&D department that's really focused on those new technologies and making sure we are, you'll see the last one here, being willing to change. So the utility industry has historically been a long lead industry, right? You have to plan 20 years ahead. How do we become more agile so as new technologies come into play, we can put those on the ground? And then I'll say electrification as well. I'll talk a little bit about our electric vehicle work. Transportation is the largest carbon emitting sector. And so how do we decarbonize that in our region, and all the partnerships that are going on to work on that? So this is a graphic that if you are kind of involved in TVA's decarbonization journey, you've probably seen before. But it shows that drop from 2005 to 2020 in carbon. That was really driven by adding 1,600 megawatts of new nuclear generation, retiring about 7,700 megawatts of coal, constructing some lower emitting gas resources. And there's a lot of controversy over that fuel switching, and we could talk about that in a moment as well. We added about 2,300 net gigawatts of energy efficiency and 1,700 megawatts of wind and solar capacity. And you can see here some of the things that we're working on to get to that 2030 number. We've also pulled from our toolbox here over on the right. We're even pulling some of that forward. You see us investing quite a bit in additional energy efficiency. You see us starting that small, I apologize, that small modular reactor work, trying to pull that forward as well. But also for us, it's improving our performance of our current fleet. So we do think we can do some upgrades on like our hydro generation facilities and eke out quite a bit more megawatts there. And so we're working at solutions to get that done. And obviously, many of you have heard we're working to add 10,000 megawatts of solar by 2035. It's quite a bit of solar, working through all those supply chain and other issues. Excited to see some movement on that this week. And so we continue to implement toward that 2030 goal. And then you get over and some of these things like hydrogen. How is that going to play? The gas fleet, the new gas builds that we are proposing, like at Cumberland, they are on the ground ready to burn 30% hydrogen or use 30% hydrogen. Obviously, the infrastructure is not there yet to do that. Obviously, also investing in carbon capture, but those are things that are kind of on the radar screen being invested in to try to figure out how you make the rest of this journey to that net zero. So the electric vehicles, so we are partnering with the state of Tennessee to deliver a level 3 charging facility every 50 miles on major thoroughfares. I'm looking to achieve 200,000 EVs on the road by 2028. I will say the Tolene household recently bought their first used electric vehicle, and I'm probably the one with range anxiety more than anyone else. So excited to see this coming on board and excited to see the folks in the Valley who are making that shift. Also, I think our carbon and our affordability is bringing in a lot of electric vehicle manufacturers and battery manufacturers, which I think is really good for the region as well. So we are a founding member of the Utility Electric Vehicle Collaboration Initiative, and there's a whole host of utilities involved in that. And then even in our own fleet, our light and medium duty fleet are going all electric by 2030. And so TVA customers who are making this shift, on average, they save about $1,000 a year on fuel, and you reduce your greenhouse gas by nearly 70% using those 2021 numbers we just looked at. The good news for Nashville is I understand there are about 300 charging stations in and around Nashville already. So I think you guys are leading the way there. I mentioned this before, part of that toolbox is the 10,000 megawatts of solar. There's an additional 2,000 megawatts that our local power companies could implement. And so we are working with them on that as well. And then we're expanding industry leading programs like our Green Invest program. So that helps businesses who want to go faster in their investment in renewables do that. I know NES has a community solar opportunity. I'd encourage all of you guys to check that out and subscribe if you haven't done so. But we also have programs where you can do, I think, Paula mentioned this. So we have contractors approved to implement solar if you want to do rooftop solar as well. So lots of ways to even go faster, either as an individual, as a community, or as an industry, and trying to make sure those things are available for everybody. Natural gas. So as we build out that 10,000 megawatts, as we look to replace coal, we do have some new natural gas we are proposing to bring online. And that continues to be very controversial. So gas burns about, or creates about 50% to 2/3 less carbon. And that fuel switching is really key for a couple of reasons. That immediate reduction in carbon is important. But also it helps that 24/7 reliability with renewables. So we're doing some work with utility scale battery. You've got about a 4-hour battery. You've got issues there, but those are coming along. They're just not there yet, and the cost is really exorbitant. So gas really helps with that reliability. Early morning January, before before the sun comes up, those are probably some of our heaviest demand days, right? And so gas provides that support. It would also provide support for other new technologies that come on board, right? There's going to be a lot of transition as new technologies, whatever they are, come on board. And so that gas really provides that support to make that doable. I hear a bit about folks concerned about stranded costs with gas. You know, again, I think because gas will not only support renewables, but other new technologies, it's not as much of a fear in our modeling. And you could get to a day where gas is just there on those times when you really need it, right? Because these other more cost-effective options are finally coming online and can be put in at the utility level. And that's not a bad place to be either. The other thing about some of these new gas plants is they're ready to do things like hydrogen. They're ready to do things like carbon capture, and they let you retire some less efficient gas plants on the system as well. So no, you know, the best of all worlds is you could move from fossil fuels totally. The system is not ready for that yet, which is why we are looking at some gas options. And so again, lots of controversy there. I'm sure I'll get some questions there as folks try to figure out what the alternatives look like and what the options are. And then I'll talk about home uplift for just a moment. You'll see we do a number of home uplift programs around the valley, the Tennessee, that's the area that we serve. I want to switch real quick in the idea of time here to Nashville specific. So 655 of those families are in the Nashville area. Each home receives about $8,400 average cost invested in their home. And 92 of these homes receive, or I think 92% of these homes receive services from minority contractors as well. So I think Paula mentioned this as well. It not only lowers your utility bill, about $415 on average, but really we've done some studies recently about other values, the health values that Paula mentioned, just the quality of life values. So we've funded around $9 million in weatherization in Nashville for home uplift. We also have 6 schools participating in the school uplift program. So overall for energy efficiency and demand response in Nashville, about $6 million saved, and the equivalent carbon emissions, it would take about, how am I supposed to say this? Let's see. It would take 40 homes. The carbon emissions from 40 homes are being pulled off by the work we're doing here in energy efficiency and demand response. So lots of great work going on here, lots of great partnership. This is not just TVA alone, but a really great work. And it was really great to see those other life benefits from these programs as well. So before I leave carbon, I wanted to talk real quick about climate adaptation planning. We do look very hard at how climate change can impact our system. There is a statement that is available on our website, and there is a plan. We look at this each year. We work very closely with DOE and EPRI and others. You know, how do you create a resilient system as well? Many of you have probably heard the amount of transmission upgrades needed, right? Some of the ideas we're looking at is bringing additional clean energy from other areas of the country into our system. And there, if you're relying on 1 or 2 lines to bring that in, how do you make sure that that is resilient and going to withstand, you know, one bad storm? And so we continue to ask ourselves those questions, look really hard at these issues, a lot of weather impact modeling and that sort of work being done there as well. And then I will turn quickly. I know I'm probably over time, but I'll talk just a minute about biodiversity. I don't know how many of you guys know this, but Tennessee, Alabama support the greatest amount of aquatic biodiversity in North America. And so I had the great treat a few weeks ago to go out in the field with a photographer from National Geographic who prides himself on showing each species, the beauty of each species to itself. So whether that's a huge elephant, which we all get excited about, or a darter in one of our waters, really celebrating that biodiversity. And we just had a field day. I think we were down in the Duck River area. How much biodiversity is there? And we're doing a lot of work to help protect that. The TVA board understands the benefit of biodiversity, and it has a new biodiversity policy that focuses on bringing the thoughts around biodiversity, both our operations and our natural areas. And so one area we see that in is the pollinator program. We're doing some research work about the value of transmission line right-of-ways as pollinator thoroughfares. And so this is really exciting. As many of you know, pollinators are key to food supply and medicines and those sorts of things. So lots of great work being done here. But we did have a program where we worked with the Stratford School here in Nashville on their right-of-way. And the students did some awesome design work, learning the science behind what was needed. And that picture, that flower, like when I was there was nothing. We were planting things. And so that picture is just from a few days ago. So really exciting work. It was great to see how excited the students were around learning about biodiversity, pollinators, and the importance of those kind of areas for these types of creatures. So we also do a lot of work, like I said, on endangered species, bat protection, and those are the areas that I really love what TVA does. And so happy to talk more about that as well. And before I turn it over today, I'll just say, see if I can stop sharing just for a moment, that folks asked me a little bit about what they can do. And so I would encourage you to check out some of the links around Nashville's programs, around the solar subscription, around Green Invest. We have some programs where you can look at the energy efficiency of your home and ways that you can take steps to improve that as well. But also, I will say our desire for public input and public comment. So we appreciate all of you guys who come to some public meetings or to submit comments. Let us know what you're thinking, where your head is and what's important to you as we move forward. And then for any of you guys in your organizations, if you need me to come talk or answer some questions or things like that, always happy to do that as well. But I'm really excited about the journey we are on. It is a time of significant change in the utility industry. And I think we all see this opportunity to make this clean energy transition. And I will say, I feel like this region is actually ahead of the game and finding those, also the economic development benefits of that clean energy transition, with the jobs that are being brought in as part of that as well. So I will stop there, Christina and Jen, and happy to answer any questions from you guys or anybody else. And just happy to see everybody's faces and know that somebody's actually listening to me, because it's kind of weird talking to yourself on Zoom. So I'll turn it to you. Over to you, Christina.
I agree, Rebecca. It is a little weird when you have this webinar set up and you're just kind of talking into the ether. So we really appreciate both you and Paula taking some time to kind of set the context. We have lots of great questions in the Q&A, and we will try to get to all of those. I did have a real quick, just a couple of follow-up questions about what you were just talking about. So you mentioned, of course, the new natural gas plants that you're going to be bringing on, and worldwide there is a push to lower emissions from fossil fuels, of course, and you know this, and you're very kind of tapped into this world. So can you just explain just a tiny bit more for our audience, kind of how they can even maybe start pushing for these new technologies in battery, or what it is to maybe, if they want to see natural gas come out of that mix, and what that would actually look like? We have the International Energy Agency and the UN Environment Program saying, we don't need new gas infrastructure if we're going to meet those goals for emissions reduction. So if there's just any kind of additional input that you can put towards our community, and just kind of getting their brains around if they have any power to push this at all.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So I think a lot of it is driven right now with some policy decisions, right? And so we need our leaders in the country to invest in some of this research and development as well, right? And It's almost like, I mean, we've heard of the moonshot. It's literally like that, right? You've got to almost push and drive from a policy standpoint. So I think to the extent all of us can influence policymakers, I think that's huge. I'll say, Christina, I went to COP26 last year in Scotland, and I was excited because the conversation was no longer around, is this happening? Is this not happening? It was about finding solutions on reducing carbon, right? And I think we're going to see that again this year. And so I have to think when the international community comes together, that we're going to see some of those things. But I think from an individual standpoint, it's really supporting those policies and those decision makers who are driving that kind of push and that investment in those research and development options.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And it's pretty cool that you went to COP. And you've talked a little bit about TVA's energy efficiency, and I think you touched a little bit on job development. But when we're talking about equity, can you just explain a little bit more about that? How you incorporate community input? So you mentioned that kind of at the end. Maybe just how you incorporate it when you're talking about justice and safety, when you're developing new facilities or making changes at operations at current facilities, and just basically how can folks get involved in those input sessions?
Yeah, so I'll start with the practical, which is there's a button on TVA's website called Get Involved. So if you click that, you'll see some options. But let me say this. So every time we do a project on the ground, we're doing kind of environmental reviews of that. And part of that has a public comment period. And most of those have public meetings. So we would encourage folks to come in and do that. We also have, we are always out talking to groups like this and trying to get input as well. And so if there is issues coming up and you guys would like somebody from TVA, please reach out and let us know as well. We have what we call federal advisory groups that have different representatives on them. You can find those on the website. You may know one of those representatives, and maybe a great way. But, I know it can get hard to just write in your comments or come to a public meeting and say them. So we're looking for more and more ways, particularly, Christina, to your point, with our environmental justice communities, right? Because if you're struggling in other ways, writing in public comments is probably not high on your list, right? And how do we engage those communities? How do we talk to those communities? Can we use church groups or other community groups to do that? So we're doing more and more of that. We're always looking for ideas on how to do that better, as I think many of our groups are. How do we really engage with folks? So, but I think the practical answer is that Get Involved button, and you'll see some opportunities to jump in pretty quick.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I appreciate that little bit of extra context on those 2 points that I know are important to our audience and to us here at Urban Green Lab and Zero Waste Nashville. So Jen, I know that you are having a little bit of technical difficulties. If you can unmute, if you had that one question you wanted to ask, otherwise we'll just jump right into the Q&A. Give her a second. It's not a Zoom webinar unless something goes wrong. This one's actually gone pretty well.
Pins and needles the whole time. Like, is my internet gonna hold, right?
Or like that fear that you weren't talking to anybody the entire time. Yes, we heard you though. All right, okay. So it seems like Jen isn't able to get back to us. I know that her question basically was just kind of talking about how TVA and NES work together. And so if there's any kind of points that Paula, maybe if you wanted to further explain about your role versus TVA's, we would appreciate a little bit of explanation around that. I know y'all kind of touched on it, but if there's just any more context you wanted to provide, and then we'll jump right into the Q&A.
Well, Nashville Electric Service is one of those 150 some odd LPCs that Rebecca mentioned, local power companies. We purchase all of our power from TVA to distribute to our customers. TVA generates the power through hydroelectric plants and all of the other ways that she mentioned, and that goes to our substations then for us to distribute to our customers. So that's the highest level. That's the highest level explanation for NES and TVA.
And let me give NES kudos. They have been on the forefront of some of these sustainability discussions, and really as a community. And so it's great to have them as a partner at the table to really kind of push us and question from time to time. So we appreciate that NES partnership, longtime partners, even longer than Paula and I have been at the organization. So.
We do have some veterans on the call though, which is great. So I think this is a great transition then to start into our Q&A. Appreciate everyone on this call putting your questions into that Q&A function and for working with us on this kind of new way that we're going to be doing it moving forward. So I'm very excited to get to these questions. I'm going to start with some of them that are a little bit more geared towards you, Paula, and the Power of Change program. So we have, you mentioned the percentage of folks in Nashville who are doing it. I think you said that 87%, but do you by any chance know how many Nashvillians participate in Power of Change, like actual numbers of folks who do it?
Well, I don't want to call them just Nashvillians because NES does cover all of Davidson County and a portion of all 6 surrounding counties. And all of our customers are obviously eligible to participate, well, with a few exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to live in Davidson County, though, to participate. And so right now, that number is 362,115 accounts are opted in.
Wow. Thank you for having that number ready to go. Appreciate it. And then we have a question here from Amanda who said, is this similar to Piedmont's Share the Warmth program? Basically, how are the recipients of these energy efficiency programs, how are they identified? Do you work with local organizations to identify those in need?
I would say that our Project Help program is more like Piedmont's Share the Warmth. Through Project Help, customers can donate $1 if they just write their or make their payment for $1 over the amount that they owe. The dollar is forwarded to NeedLink Nashville. They are the administrator for our Project Help program, who does temporary and emergency energy assistance for customers based on need and income. As for how customers are identified for the Home Uplift program, we, of course, do marketing through social media and our website and bill inserts and things like that to direct people to our website to the application itself, which talks about the income requirements and the other qualifications. And then also we go through periodically and tag above average usage and home ownership. And we're making our way around all of the zip codes of Nashville as a target for a direct mailing. We mail them a letter with the application, to see if that's something that they're interested in. That, of course, doesn't have anything to do with their income, so they may not qualify income-wise, but at least their energy usage, we can tell from their energy usage that it is above normal.
So there's room for improvement, you can see. Wonderful.
Right. That they may be a good candidate, right?
Yeah. And then, but there is still that income requirement, even if they are higher. Thank you. Okay, perfect. And so just a couple of more questions for specifically for you, Paula. Jesse was asking why there isn't a discount for using power at night during non-peak power demand, like if you do any of those kind of demand response types programs. Looks like he's asked, or they are asking about. And then a similar question, excuse me, I had it and now I lost it. Oh yes, Anna was saying, I just got solar panels on my house. Any idea if when TVA or NES will let us sell power back to the grid? So kind of just like that idea of demand response, of lowering your own kind of outtake of the grid, and whether or not people will be incentivized to do that.
Okay, so NES has a couple of different programs through TVA for solar installations. And so I would direct, I think it was Anna, to email renewables@nespower.com to find out more about that. I know that through the Dispersed Power program, there is a way for customers to be reimbursed for TVA's avoided costs, but that's a little bit complicated to get into for an open forum like this, I think. Okay. So that's where I would direct Anna is to renewables@nespower.com. That's an email.
Perfect.
And As far as time of use rates, that is a great question, and it's actually one that we added to our residential customer satisfaction survey, which is out in the internet world right now as we speak, hopefully getting lots of good responses. Our rates team is constantly evaluating different programs to see what we can do to benefit our customers. And we do have a commercial time of use rate program for our larger commercial customers, and we're going to see what those residential customers have to say.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, and I appreciate that you're getting that kind of input from folks. Rebecca, that wasn't exactly to you, but there have been some questions about whether or not TVA is going to do any incentives on renewables and specifically solar. So if you could talk to that, I think that will kind of get maybe 2 or 3 questions answered as well.
Yeah, so again, I'm nothing if not a glutton for controversy, I think, but I will say this. So when the solar industry was just kicking off, particularly the rooftop solar industry, TVA did do quite a few incentives that LPCs could utilize. And that, I do think that really helped kick off the industry here in the Valley. I will say, Christina, one of the things we saw was those programs were being taken advantage of by very wealthy residents, right? And so when you do something like that, that cost gets subsidized by everybody else in the system. And so we started to see that issue, and we're still struggling with that issue. Like, right, how do you solve those types of issues? You see other places in the country dealing with that as well. And so those are the types of policy issues which I wish I had all the answers to, but they're the issues that we're still struggling through. It's one of the reasons I think why a lot of our energy efficiency programs, we've really focused on helping those who need the help the most. And so I think those are the types of policy issues we're going to continue to have to wrestle with as we kind of move through this clean energy transition.
Great.
And if I could,
oh, go ahead, Paula.
Can I put in a plug there for Music
Sure.
City Solar?
Yes, that's
because
actually the next question.
She was talking about, a lot of people, the people that they are serving with the rooftop solar, those tend to be our wealthier customers. Music City Solar is a community solar farm that anybody can participate in, and the panels are not very expensive, and you don't even have to own your own home. You don't have to have a roof line that faces the correct direction. You can live in a condo, you can live in a shaded area. You don't have to, you can even rent and still be a part of Music City Solar, which contributes green energy to the grid, and you get the credit from the output of the panels that you subscribe to on your bill. So it's a really great way that is really beneficial to our community and to our customers, because again, you don't have to own your home, you don't have to have an appropriate roof line, you don't have to pay for the maintenance on the panels. The subscription covers everything. So it's a good worry-free way to participate in green power.
I love that. Thank you so much for that plug. And we will, I know Rachel put it in the chat, but we will definitely make sure that is in the follow-up email as well. And kind of a couple of similar questions that we got around the Biden kind of enacting that Production Defense Act this week. And I think, Rebecca, you even kind of alluded to it. So just curious if that, that decision at the federal level is going to impact anything with renewables kind of here in Tennessee Valley.
Yeah, I think I would believe that the administration's desire is that it certainly will. One of the things we are starting to see or have seen is significant cost increases and availability risk of things like solar panels, right? And so you saw that action from this administration this week, trying to do 2 things, right? Trying to continue their push for domestic manufacturing of those, but also to relieve some tariff pressure on importing those. So I think the hope is you would see that market improve. We have not really been impacted yet. We have been buying panels pretty far ahead of time, right? And so, but we were starting to see that crunch as well. So hopefully, not only for folks like doing utility scale solar or community solar, or even rooftop solar, that panel availability will improve based on some of these steps. It'll be interesting to see the impacts of all of that, right? So
it's still so new. If people haven't seen it, it was literally like yesterday or 2 days ago. So yeah, it's a little hard to say exactly what it will do, but good to hear kind of what we think it will do. And I think this is kind of going off of a little bit what you were just saying, Paula, but we had an anonymous question basically saying like, oh my goodness, wind and solar look so small in this energy mix. If more households get solar panels, or maybe if they're in that community solar program, will that increase the percentage, or is it just based off of commercially, what's commercially generated? So can individuals impact kind of the energy mix of Tennessee, I guess?
Yeah, so the graphs I was showing you were TVA system, right? But to that question, we are working hard now, like through our sustainability reporting, to try to figure out ways to count everything we can, right? Individuals, renewable uses or non-carbon emitting options that come their way. Some of this electric vehicle work, right? The carbon offsets from that transportation sector. How do you show and how do you count all of that? And I'll say a few of our LPCs, I think NES is included in this, have been doing some work with us on trying to get those carbon numbers shored up for their communities, for their areas, right? What is our carbon footprint? And then how can we measure against that? The world of carbon accounting is still emerging, right? And so I think we're working on making sure we can show and take credit for everybody's part in this. But I think the question's a great one because it can get a little disheartening as an individual, right? Because it's so, I mean, you're talking about what did I say, almost 40,000 megawatt hours of capacity, it's just, but everybody's impact really does matter. So finding ways to talk about that and show that, I think that's high on our list as well as we move forward, because you want folks to see the impact they can have, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think this community here wants to know what they can do to really push the needle. So I appreciate that. Ed was talking about you mentioned domestic production. And so Ed was talking about heated discussion in Europe, as it pertains to natural gas and kind of maybe hopefully replacing some of those Russian pipelines as they're waging war in Ukraine. Do any of those technology factors affect TVA, or is it completely different? And he said Bollywick, which I had never heard of that word before, and I had to look it up. And Bollywick is a particular area of interest or sphere of operations. So I don't know if I exactly understood the question. I apologize, but the way that I am reading it is basically, is the war in Ukraine affecting TVA's technology?
Yeah, so I kind of read that as a ball of problems or a ball of concerns of bailiwicks, but no, it's a great question. So I think the geopolitical, it of course will have an impact at some level, right? Probably, I would argue both, maybe good and bad. So things like if you see Europe running for certain technologies, does that mean the availability for us to utilize those is going to be diminished? The other flip side of that, though, is that they have policies and investments being made to develop new technologies that obviously one day the entire world may be able to take advantage of, including us. And so I think that's a good question. I mean, you see things like also just gas prices in the United States today impacting our discussions around energy, right? And so I think you always have to be on the lookout for all of these things kind of outside and how they can impact. But certainly my biggest one of my early concerns was again around that supply chain, right? Is if you see Europe rushing their transition for good reasons, what does that mean to the impact on the supply chain? And so we'll see what that looks like. Again, I wish my crystal ball was clearer, but I think there'll be a pinch before manufacturers are able to build up to the demand, is my best guess at this point.
I appreciate that. It's a lot of moving parts with that discussion for sure. So we had a couple of questions about some of the other types of energy that y'all are using. So Jesse was asking, what is TVA's geothermal and wind turbine energy generation capacity? So that might be a very specific question, but if you know that, or if we can even send it afterwards, that would be helpful.
I can send it afterwards, Christina. I will say small.
Okay.
I don't think we have any geothermal right now.
Mhm.
That's a great question. If we have a PPA for any, and most of our wind is outside being imported in and doesn't seem to run when I need it to run on the system, but that's a different issue. But we'll get those numbers and we'll get them sent to you.
Perfect. And can you just, for clarification, PPA, can you just explain what that means?
Power purchase agreement. So this is where we are purchasing power from someone who is generating it for us.
Got it. Thank you. And then just Olivia, just a finer point on whether or not wind energy is viable. She hasn't heard much about it mentioned during this presentation.
Yeah, we continue to look at it with some of our research partners. It just is not as viable in our region as something like a solar. Now, I will say one area where I might diverge from others, my goal is not to chase renewables. My goal is to reduce carbon. And so there are some other technologies that we continue to look like maybe another hydrogeneration pump storage type of facility, because that storage issue is really big when you're bringing in renewables. You know, we talk about small modular reactors, and I know there's pros and cons to nuclear, but frankly, I'm technology agnostic as long as it brings in that carbon reduction that we're looking for. So, but wind has just not played well as far as the capacity it provides in the valley. And significant transmission would need to be brought in, and that's getting harder and harder to bring it in from where it is a better provider like out west or in, you know, the Illinois area. But we continue to look at it for sure.
Okay. And just my own follow-up. I remember someone saying this, and I might be completely misremembering it, but is there something in Tennessee where if land is technically viable for farming, you cannot put, you know, wind capacity on there? Is that something I apologize if that came from nowhere. I just remember hearing that, and I just didn't know if that's one of the reasons why, particularly in the valley, it isn't viable, or if that's other things.
Yeah, it's a great, Christine. I don't know the answer to that, Christine. I don't know if there is a state law or regulation on the books around that. I will just say my comment is the turbines just don't spin like we need them to in the valley. The wind is not what you get like out west, right? And so ours is more of that, but turbines are getting better, and we continue to look at that as well. But you mentioned a great point, and I'll just throw this in because it is one of my concerns. The land use impact of solar is huge, right? So to really be able to do those 10,000 megawatts is going to take quite a bit of land. And so we constantly try to find brownfields and places where it makes sense to put those solar panels. But there's going to be a growing conflict in a state that's heavy agriculture, obviously one of the most biodiverse places in the country, right? We've got to watch out for that conflict. And so it's something that we think about and spend a lot of time thinking about as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know solar is always, you know, the footprint is getting smaller and smaller, and we kind of talked about that throughout the conversation, that we're just kind of, you know, always looking towards those technology improvements. And I appreciate the comment about brownfields, because brownfields are, you know, for folks that don't know, are those areas that have been contaminated for one reason or the other, and certainly would not be viable for agriculture, but could certainly be viable for renewable projects. So thank you for that. And a couple of questions. So you mentioned a generation facility with hydrogen. And so Phil was asking, where is that hydrogen coming from? And then, yes, that was the only one about that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I've got mine open too. And there's an anonymous question about kind of the same thing about the energy needed to create hydrogen. And both Phil and anonymous are very correct, right? So hydrogen's just in its infancy a bit. So you'll hear people talk about purple hydrogen and green hydrogen and black hydrogen, right? And that's all driven by what resource creates the hydrogen, what resource to I think it was Anonymous's question, who's splitting the atom, right? Hydrogen's really a storage, you could argue it's a storage fuel more than anything else. And so I think those are great questions. My hope is that, as you guys know, you have peaks and valleys on the system, right? When energy usage high, energy usage is low. Ramping and ramping down your generation facilities to meet those needs can be quite difficult, right? So could you use something like hydrogen when you're going down, creating hydrogen to keep that kind of level so you're not ramping up and down your machines, and then use that hydrogen? But there is a lot of work that would have to be done to make hydrogen work. As many of you know, it's very dangerous at times, and there's no infrastructure in place like there are gas pipelines or things like that to transport right now. So I apologize if I made hydrogen sound like it was more real than it is yet. I think it's still in that R&D phase for sure. So great questions though.
Yeah, and thank you for grabbing that other one that was right underneath it that I missed. So we have about 5 minutes left. We're going to try to kind of rapidly get through these last couple of questions. Anonymous is asking, if their customers don't accept nuclear power as quote unquote clean alternative, is there a way to determine if my renewable energy certificates are only from hydro, wind, and solar? So is there any kind of wiggle room in where you're getting your energy from?
So that's a great question. There are ways to, we do things like some companies coming into the Valley want new to the world renewables, right? And so we'll build that renewable facility. But the true answer is nope, all electrons are the same color, right? But I will say, I was just briefed on this yesterday. We're working on some blockchain distributed ledger technology type innovations, where you could maybe kind of color the electrons a bit more, where you could trace that energy from its generation facility all the way through the system. Again, it's not quite there yet, but I think that is something that down the road will be viable and something that is going to grow. It's an interesting area. Like, I don't know, I don't understand cryptocurrency at all, but I find the blockchain distributed ledger technology, I think there's a lot of usage for it, including in the utility industry. So.
Interesting.
I'm not helping you get through these fast at all, Christina. I'm sorry.
You're fired. Get out of here. You did mention this, Rebecca. So if there's maybe just anything you want to add to this, there was a question about, is our power grid resilient? Looking at Texas, it made this person really nervous. So just, is our grid resilient?
Yeah, no, great question. I'm glad you asked that, Christina. I saw it pop up. And so let me say, we run our system very differently than Texas does. So we are public power. We're motivated by making sure that reliability is there. We're motivated to invest in the transmission system. The utility industry is really great at lessons learned. So 5-6 years ago, we started putting heat trace tapes on some of our gas pipelines. So I think what I can tell you is we have a very resilient system. We also run with the reserve margin, both because of requirement and because of just best practice, to make sure that power is going to be there when you need it there. So we are in a very different situation than the structure that is set up somewhere like Texas. And I think that really benefits the Valley. I think, again, it's another reason we're seeing such economic development, because that reliable power that we can provide here as well. So you're good. We're good. We work really hard to make sure you have what you need, because it is life critical, right? We all know that. Sometimes we can take it for granted. I know my children do. And so trying to remember how critical electricity is just to our quality of life. So
thank you for that. There's a question, I'm gonna put two questions together basically. Are there any model state policies that can help Tennessee accelerate to move towards either renewables or electric vehicles, which this other question is talking about? How is TVA ensuring capacity to allow all of us to charge these kind of impending electric vehicles that will be on the road?
Yeah, I'm not aware of other state policies to look at that I would, like Rebecca would recommend. I'm proud, I'm a Tennessean, I'm proud of the steps the state has taken around things like electric vehicles and sustainability and clean energy. So I think we are well on our way in the right direction there. As far as making sure you can charge your electric vehicles, yes. So we go through a continuous planning process, and part of that is planning the load, right? And so as you can imagine, as we are studying electric vehicles, when they really impact the system, what times of day, how much, those kind of things, we look out pretty far to make sure that our generation can meet that demand. So yes, we certainly take that into account, as that's a growing area. So.
And we're not going to ask if you are aware of this, but someone wants you to be aware of New York State's law called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and just wanting to know if you're aware of their aggressive laws, and look into it if you're not.
I will do that. Both California and New York are pretty aggressive in these areas, so I'll make sure. I'm not as familiar with New York, so I'll make sure I take a look there. Thank you for
thank you for sharing those. And wondering if there is a robust consumer education program, especially for businesses and households, about energy conservation, and is there any modeling to decrease energy use that can have achieving less production needed beyond just retrofits and energy efficiency?
Yeah. And Paula may have some thoughts here as well. I would encourage folks to look at our green programs. I know there is some modeling that we do with folks, particularly large industrials, and I'm guessing local power companies work with smaller folks on those types of things. So I don't know off the top of my head any names, but we can certainly follow up in the email, Christina, with any resources that we think would be valuable there.
And so we are right at 1:15. I'm going to ask one last question about pollinators, because I also know that that is one of your favorite things. Rebecca, we have two questions. One was talking about putting wind and solar on unusable land, like old landfills. That seems like a very similar answer about what we talked about with brownfields. So unless there's something that you really want to address there. And then there's one about states and commonwealths and countries and utility level generation. It's a pretty hefty, wonderful question from Ursula that we are going to look into and get answered after this. So the last question is from Ed. Is there any interaction between TVA and the development community to help them with retention of native species, pollinator roots, etc.?
Say that one more time, Christina.
Is there any interaction between TVA and the development community to help them with retention of native species, pollinator roots, etc.?
Yes, so we're seeing more and more interest from some of our industrial customers in these areas, and we work really hard with them about that. I will say an example is actually our solar developers. So some solar TVA builds itself, some solar we work with developers to bring, and they have been really great partners trying to figure out ways to make sure we're protecting habitat. How are you going to maintain in a way that's going to be respectful of pollinators and other creatures? So that work, I think it's going to grow as we keep going, because more and more industries we see, because of folks like you, are very interested in their impacts and how they make that better. So I think as a consumer, we have a lot of weight to carry in that. And so I think they're reacting to that. And so, yeah, we're doing a lot of those conversations, more than I have done in other times in my career. And just people valuing those, even our public lands more and more. Part of that's the pandemic and people needed somewhere to go, but really helping us take care of those public lands and leave no trace, and those kind of things are really, really, I think, getting new wind, which is exciting to see. So
new wind for those pollinators to fly on. So thank you so much, Rebecca Tolene and Paula Geruntino. This has been a really, really wonderful conversation. Jen is back. Hello.
I know, I made it. Had a lot of technical difficulties.
You're lucky we're well.
But this has been amazing.
Well, and I'll just jump in and say, Christina and Jen, thank you guys for what you do, kind of like pulling this type of conversation together. And it's been exciting for me to be here. And Paula, it's been great to see you and hear about the program, the Pennies program, and just an awesome hour for me. So thank you guys for pulling us together.
Wonderful. And Rebecca and Paula, would you all mind if we share your information in the follow-up email so that folks can say hello and chat with y'all?
Sounds great.
That'll be fine.
Sorry, Paula, I cut you off.
I would echo what Rebecca said. It was a great opportunity to be here with you and talk about the power of change and actually learn a little even more about TVA. Nice.
All right. Well, I think we're all set. Thank you all so much for such a respectful and energizing discourse. And we will get all of those resources to y'all and the video up again, probably tomorrow. We will keep this conversation going by sharing folks' emails and making sure that we answer that one last question that we didn't quite get to. Wonderful.
Sounds
so
good.
much.
This has been fabulous. Thank you all so much. I'm glad I made it back, and we'll see you all next month for our next episode of Sustainable in the City.
Wonderful. Bye, everyone. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
Bye.
Bye, guys.